All right.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our third Thursday Tea Talk today. Hi, Carrie and Kimberly, who are with
And
us right
everyone.
now, and everyone else watching later on. We're repetitive at the top of almost every hour. We say we're so excited for our next guest, but it's true. It's because Mackenzie does a really good job of curating like the coolest people doing the most meaningful work who are willing to come and teach us. And so, genuinely excited to learn from today's teacher who is here with us, Annlin. I'm going to read you her bio, just give you a little bit of background about the treat and the adventure she's about to take us on, and then hand it over for her to do so. So Annlin is an award-winning archaeologist, honored with the Sandparks Women in Conservation Award last year and the Mail and Guardian Power of Women Award for Entrepreneurship and Business also last year. She holds a master's degree in archaeology from the University of Pretoria and serves as a principal investigator with the Association of Southern African Paleontologists and Archaeologists. As the first Black South African woman archaeologist specializing in cultural heritage resource management, she's focused on the conservation and management of burial grounds, graves, and the repatriation of human remains. Sorry about that, my phone was buzzing in my lap. She's the founder and director of Reach Archaeology Consulting, a pioneering heritage consultancy dedicated to preserving both tangible and intangible cultural heritage through ethical grave relocation and community engagement. With 14 years of experience, she's made significant contributions to cultural heritage policy, legislative reform, and educational initiatives that inspire the next generation of archaeologists. Her research emphasizes the ethical handling of rehumanization of human remains. I love that part. The modernization of African burial sites and culturally sensitive approaches to repatriation and exhumation practices. And her presentation today is called Between Earth and Ancestry, the Sacred Work of Grave Relocation. So thank you for what you're about to share with us.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen, and thank you so much for that warm welcome. I sincerely appreciate it. And also thank you for the invitation and extending the invitation to me to just come and share a little bit about my work. And I'm going to take us on a journey. But before I begin, I'd like to begin every meeting of the minds with just an acknowledgement of those who came before us. So if you will just join me in a moment of silence and reflection and an acknowledgement of our ancestry and our lineage. Just one moment, please. Thank you. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I sincerely appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen. And if you'll just confirm with me that you're able to see my presentation. No, not that one. Let me open that up again. There it is. And oh, goodness me. Oh, there we go. There we are.
Yep, I see it.
All right.
It's just not in
Thank you so
present.
much for.
I don't know if that matters. Like we can see the side screen too. It's not just the slides itself.
Yeah, it's not in present mode.
Okay. Okay. And I just put it in present mode. Let's try that again. Still nothing.
And that's okay. We can see it this way. That works too.
Okay. All right. Just so long as it's visible and everyone can see it. Let's try
there we
this
go.
view.
Oh, now
Now it's full screen.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay, so again, welcome to my presentation titled Between Earth and Ancestry. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the grave relocation processes that my organization, Reach Archaeology Consulting, undertakes in South Africa. And before I get into that, I'd just like to have a moment to just sensitize those who are listening in or watching or who'll be watching later that we will be having a rather emotive conversation. So if you would just like to take this moment to be sensitized around the emotive actions of graves and human remains, and if children and or persons who are triggered through this process, please know that we'll be undertaking a sensitive process here. And then I'd further like to perhaps to be inclusive of those who are of our differently abled community and just self-identify. I'm a Black female. I'm wearing a blue and white a headscarf, as well as a beige and brown top. And I hope that you'd be able to understand that I do not have a preferred pronoun, but I'd like to then to say thank you again, and I'm honored. So I would like to share a short clip from a recent South African challenge. If either one of you, Lauren, would just cue that clip.
These days, it's not unusual to see informal.
Got it queued up. Let's share the screen first.
Awesome.
See if I can make this a little bigger. Maybe not.
Okay, we can see the screen.
Springing up on even the smallest pockets of vacant land, the result of a housing, economic, and law enforcement crisis. But you would think that the spaces set aside for burying our dead would be respected. Sadly, that's not the case. In the Eastern Cape's Buffalo City municipality, public cemeteries have fallen into such a state of disrepair and neglect, they've become targets for land invasion. We were alarmed by reports that graveyards had become informal settlements. But nothing could have prepared us for what we encountered when we visited Buffalo City for ourselves. I'm in Duncan Village in East London, an area notorious for municipal mismanagement and endemic poverty. And we're here to follow up on reports about a tussle for land between the living and the dead. We've come here because we had to see it for ourselves. We're at Lujiza Cemetery, 5 kilometers from the center of East London. Like all the cemeteries in Buffalo City Metro, it's owned and maintained by the municipality. I'm putting these on because the terrain here is hard to navigate. You can't find the graves without wading into the bush. Let's go try and find some. How's it, boss? Grand. Are you cleaning up here? Okay. The maintenance is a welcome sight. Our team was here last month and the situation was very different. It was impossible to navigate. A total lack of security and only partial fencing have allowed a casual approach to the memories of the dead. Can you believe this is a gravesite? No, man. This isn't right. family is supposed to get here if it's that hard for me?
The area was bushy. It was scary.
Tembi Yono buried her father here.
All right.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And let me just get back to my presentation. There we go. So thank you so much for sharing that. I just wanted to say that video shows not only a South African conservation challenge, but this is also a global conservation challenge around the protection of sacred burial grounds, in whatever shape that they may look like all over the world, whether they're a mausoleum, a cemetery, a traditional or an ancestral burial ground. But this is a global challenge. And that is what we're trying to address as an organization. And I hope you've had a little bit of time to revise this this next slide, because it speaks to my organization, Reach Archaeology Consulting. So just to provide some context beyond the video we just watched, which really provides why we do what we do. When I joined the heritage sector, I realized that we needed an approach that is both empathetic but also cognizant of the limitations in which we work. And by that, I mean the legislative limitations in which we work. And so the endeavor to begin this organization, it was with regards to ensuring that this acronym around relocations, environmental, archaeological, as well as cultural heritage are all on the same level playing field. So our organization provides tailor-made archaeological heritage solutions to a diverse group of clients, both in the private as well as the public sector. But beyond, what you will see here is the intangible aspects of what we do. So our service offerings range, and I'll get into that a little bit. But in all effect, we move graves, right? So there I am in a similar setting as what you've seen in the previous video. Some of my team have managed to clear out the site where graves had been, covered by thick vegetation, and we're doing a documentative analysis to try and identify the next of kin, grave claimants or families of those graves that are not marked, that you can see to the bottom of the image that's just popped up. Okay, some of our previous projects within the same sector have included around archaeological as well as grave management plans. And these really speak to having a centered approach when it comes to stakeholder engagement and really affording communities and interested and affected parties the opportunity to play an active role in the conservation of their graves and their land, really. And so we relocate graves that are older than 60 and 100 years. And this is because of various pieces of South African legislation. But these are then termed archaeological graves, with the understanding that there are varying methods of excavation that need to be employed when we do conduct a mitigatory process of grave relocations. And one of the things that I wanted to point out was that we move graves for various reasons, not just in the development and mining sector industries, but also We move graves for the purposes of conservation. In that similar video, you noted one of the challenges was around land invasion. So we conduct risk assessments, and we also conduct an analysis on the stabilization or the condition assessment of the grave itself or the cemetery. And then we rate these, and we afford recommendations for mitigation towards the state. In this instance, for Buffalo City, the municipality is the presiding custodian over these graves. So we would then work in tandem with those responsible for those for the conservation and preservation of human remains in this instance. And one of the ways we do that is through imploring a strategy-based public participation process, and we call that a SMART engagement. But really what that means is that we apply the principles of African logic systems. And by that we mean we approach our manner of approach, we recognize the hierarchy and the existing societal structures before we begin these intangible conversations around what is best or what is in the best interest of the cultural resource that is in jeopardy or at risk of being adversely impacted. And then some of our other service offerings include our cultural resource management plans that coincide with our heritage and grave management plans, as well as our standard archaeological and heritage impact assessments. And this is specific for the development sector, wherein cultural heritage resources may be adversely affected through development or prospecting development, such as the building of a school or housing or infrastructure development of any shape, form, or sort, but that has to be triggered by an environmental authorization process. So therein we will then act. And if you note there is a section of the National Heritage Resources Act 25 of 1999. So we ascribe to conform and comply and assist our clients to comply with that set of legislation. So we really are in two worlds when it comes to community archaeology, which is the practice of grave relocation efforts. The methodological efforts that we implore are really stem from public and community archaeology. And this means that in the archaeological practice of stakeholder and community engagement approaches, we take into consideration the local cultures, belief systems, rituals, and funerary practices of each community, which becomes very challenging in South Africa because we have a country with 12 official languages, and we have varying belief systems that underpin those languages. And so the way in which we approach the grave relocation process has to be tailored every community specific to their, not just their customary, traditional, and ritual practices, but also to their language, right? And that means when we apply this African logic system, we have to adopt those hierarchies in our approach. So we cannot, simply, revert back to our kind of Eurocentric training that we received as anthropologists in universities to say, go out and speak to people. You really have to conduct the tangible research to understand the history of this community and the history of displacement in South Africa and the history of apartheid and what that did to devalue or remove people from just their land and disenfranchise them from their cultural practices, and how we then address and redress this societal harm. So just to give you an example of from one of our reports, there I am on site. I was attending a meeting with various mine representatives and community groups. And if you note, we're not sitting in like a formal, office, or we are on site. So this is a field-based meeting. And we are having private individual conversations. So these are one-on-one engagements, right? Because we'd like to also get a individual's perspective in the approach that we're going to engage with and how it affects them. And then we kind of move into our more formal public engagements or stakeholder engagements, where we then speak to various groups or individuals or institutions within a community. So if you see here in the middle image, there is a chieftaincy, and there. So in a village we worked in Mpumalanga, the chieftaincy called a meeting to then disseminate information regarding the call to mitigate graves that had the potential to be adversely affected by a mall construction. And not a strip mall, a larger kind of mall that would service a wide demographic of people. And so the existing societal structures in between the two is that on the left-hand side, we have a peri-urban kind of community, and you can tell by the kind of informal dress code, there's jeans and golf shirts. But then on the right side, you can see that the women are more formally dressed with head gear, their arms are covered, they're wearing skirts, and the gentlemen that are towards the back in the seating area are all formally dressed because they are chiefs and of kingship and or royal representatives of the royal household or the tribal authority that is in charge of that area. And then we start with the physical exhumations following that. And if you note here, I've done my best to kind of blur out some of our colleagues there. But if you note here, we do a lot of explaining. If you note there, it's a lot of educating. Even members of the community who I think is on the left hand side of this image, who they have a lot of questions. So with engagements, we do a lot of educating, similar to this talk today. So as we go, we engage and we learn and we unlearn and we relearn, and through that consistent exchange of cultural versus ritual versus legislative versus methods and practices of best practice of archaeological field methods and excavation, we are redressing colonial pasts, because archaeologists of the past did not have the same approach to actually speaking with their communities and trying to alleviate some of the fears, ailments, and beliefs around myths that can affect how the processes of grave relocations will occur. And this takes quite some time. Speaking with people, with communities, can take years. Some of the grave relocation projects I've been involved with when I came into them may have been 10 or 12 years, long. And some of them that I've been more recently involved with, up to 2 to 5 years. So this is really a process, and it needs to be appreciated for such. Okay, so now we can have a little bit of a chat. I noted that now that you have some context as to what our organization does and kind of what goes into that, I wanted to speak a little bit about some of the questions that I get oftentimes regarding our approach, that smart stakeholder engagement approach, the application of African logic systems, and how we honor both ancestral wisdom as well as the contemporary needs. And I wanted to talk about kind of some of the funerary practices of just highlighting or indicating or demarcating where someone rests. So if you note in the top image on the right hand side, we have stone packed graves, and so these stone packed graves are indicating burials. And if you note, there's kind of a small ring around them of just a thicket that had been chopped. So, but that's being maintained because that is an area that is reserved for burial of infants and of children and even stillborns in this community in the Free State province. And on the left-hand side, we find the burials that have demarcated with more recent grave dressings, if you note, the granite plaque, etc. And so when we're saying we're honoring the ancestral wisdom, is that the practice of the conservation of these burial grounds is very much in the hands of these communities. And although they are pitted against contemporary needs of wanting to dress a grave, because there are belief systems tied into graves dressings that speak to an individual who has passed on or is deceased, not having a home or a shelter. But because of the cultural and customary practices that denote funerary and burial demarcation, we have to implore these cultural best practice methods to allow for communities to really take charge of the conservation of their burial grounds. And then I just wanted to show some images of what exactly we relocate, and what is the grave, right? So the grave is not just the faunal or the bone material within the pit, the excavation pit, but legislatively we're also required to relocate the dressing as well. And if you note here on the bottom larger image here, this is grave dressings that we were relocating for a project in the Limpopo province, which is the northern part of South Africa. And then we're also required to relocate the physical remains, as well as any grave goods or any objects that are found within the grave pit itself. So we'll conduct an osteological analysis just to make sure that all the archaeological material, in this instance would be the faunal material, are accounted for. So I've done my best not to actually show human remains in this image, in the slide. And then we ensure that when in the preparation of the burial pits, we try to recreate the burial ground in which they were previously buried in. And that may be in the form of relocating a shrub or a tree that was previously planted in honor or in respect or in light of the person dying. In some communities in Mpumalanga, they do actually denote burial grounds by planting aloe, right? To state these are sacred, because aloe is, through indigenous knowledge systems, we've come to know that the aloe tree is synonymous with being sacred, because this is the plant that is used medicinally for cleansing and cleaning, and this is part of ritual when it comes to graveyards. Once a funerary practice has occurred, in modern burials or in modern South African funerary practices, when you head back to the house following the internment of the individual at the gravesite, you would wash your hands in water that has aloe, cuttings within it, right? To cleanse your spirit from taking death with you into the home of whomever you have accompanied to bury. And then this is usually what the gravesite looks like once we have marked all the individual graves. So these are just grave markings. They aren't the final tombstones, where we haven't, relocated the tombstones because they were not there. So that's what it would look like. And then through conversations and more engagement with the individual families, they would then present to us the specific designs that they would like for each gravesite. And then in the instances where we are not able to relocate the graves because we can't identify them, or we can't move them because of their current cultural context, or issues and challenges with land invasion, land claims, or just a safety issue, we do our best to at least afford communities the opportunity to get access, right, to conduct their ceremonies and rituals of appeasement on the site, until such a time that we're able to to negotiate a way forward in terms of relocation. So it really is the last resort, but if we can conserve the graves on site, we feel that it is the best way to honor the dead, and allow them autonomy, because for a lot of them, this is their ancestral land. This is where they grew up, or this is where they wanted to be buried as their final resting place, right? And although there are contemporary needs for development, because people need jobs, and I mean, South Africa is a developing country, we try to find a balance between that, by imploring these cultural heritage management plans that will designate things like having a buffer around the area where there are grave sites, or sacred sites or ritual sites, to say, your development needs to be adjusted to include non-disturbance or no-go areas for those sites. So I added this a slide because I wanted to just highlight some of the most important considerations when working with families, and working with individuals and communities. So these are two sides of a very difficult coin to flip. On the one side, you have your own personal ethical and moral obligations. And then you also have those that are embedded in you as a practitioner, those that we're taught, schooled, and indoctrinated into understanding what practices, what customs, what rituals, and these really formulate one's own worldview. So these are really the ones we need to be cognizant of. But the biggest one here, I think, is around consent and what consent means. I think one of the biggest oversights when it comes to grave relocations is that we need to garner and negotiate for consent to do this, right? We don't just, come in and say, this is happening, you need to do this. No, all parties need to be having a basis point where they are consenting to a mitigatory approach to ensure the conservation and protection of a grave site, right? And one of the ways we do this is by also considering the current principles of conservation, and as well as considering the current legislation. And bureaucracy tends to do a little bit more harm than good sometimes. But we are able to move a little bit more fluidly, because these are conversations between all the representatives that have a role to play. So these aren't just engagements with families, and these are bilateral, conversations. The families have their own internal domestic conversations, because culture is so fluid. You'll find, and this has happened before, within one family, for example, 2 varying or even 3 varying principles around exhumation. One may be more formally against this kind of approach, because of their own underlying belief systems, whereas in other areas, because of the negotiation between what is prospecting in terms of the development, and that this may be for a greater beneficiation, then we're able to have a different conversation. But this is really the conversation is guided by these best practice principles of heritage resource management, whether they're local or international. But we do our best to ensure that we comply. And so just to bring it a little bit more home, and a little bit away from the complexities of that, how we help families, I think, is one very, very challenging question that I appreciated coming into this, is because I think just the process of grave relocations in itself is how we assist, right? And I'm just going to outline what that looks like. it looks like the kind of language that we use, right? If you note, there the use of language, and I think it was Nelson Mandela who said, if you speak to somebody in their language, you speak to their heart. So we don't like grief language, but we have a respectful, empathetic, kind of way in which we engage in various communities. If it means we need to speak 12 official languages, that's exactly what we do. um, and then we do the research that will afford us an understanding of what rituals need to happen. In certain areas of South Africa, for Nguni speaking communities, there are rituals that need to occur before we even begin having engagements with communities, before we can even start speaking. There are appeasement rituals or acknowledgement rituals or notification rituals, and one needs to really understand that ritual is really the subset of what goes into the grave relocation process. We start with ritual, and ritual is at every point. If it means we need to go back to the families to redirect a ritual that was done before, that's exactly what we do. And I think as community archaeologists, this requires a great deal of patience and a great deal of appreciation for a history that you are perhaps devoid of. And then we explain, right? Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of educating around, the responsibilities of all role players and all parties in the processes, and as well as what happens after, right? Once we've relocated the graves, and the project is now at completion, there is still a custodianship and a care and a contact process that will then, ensure that the sustainable preservation of this cultural heritage resource continues. So it's really a relationship we build. We like to consider ourselves as relationship managers. We manage the relationships between families and their deceased, but also the relationship between the developer and the community, and also the relationship between ourselves, as well as the other parties at play, which are the authorities that give us the consent to be able to do this. And then respect is always the order of business, but also respect of privacy and confidentiality. Some families are very strict about what they're willing to allow us to photograph in detail. If you check the bottom image, is a family that's conducting an appeasement ritual that includes a chicken that had been slaughtered early in the morning. And so there is a cultural custodian who is there, spilling traditional beer, as well as a mix of the chicken's blood, as well as a few other objects that are being burnt and sprayed. And there's the ceremony, the process of it is happening really early in the morning. I think it was around 5:30 in the morning, and we were only set to relocate this grave around 2 p.m. because their customs and their belief systems said, we cannot touch the grave until after the midday sun is going towards the end of the day. So we'd have to wait, and so that is a time factor for prospecting developer, for example, and it can be frustrating. But if you respect the privacy and the confidentiality of ritual, you'll have an appreciation and an understanding for affording people their constitutional rights to be able to practice their religion and their customary practices, which wasn't the case during apartheid. So these are the things we're really redressing through this process as well, and through that we honor the deceased, right? And the deceased autonomy sometimes may be disregarded because of this process. But I think through the appeasement or these rituals, then we'll afford the families to be able to then stand in proxy or as a custodians of the dead to have some kind of autonomy and speak for themselves really in the afterlife. And they do, they vocalize, I don't want to move, don't touch me, don't move me, I said I will die here, you will not touch my grave. And it does get very, very emotively charged, highly charged, when the cultural custodians, in this instance was a medicine man or traditional healer, would communicate that is the message that they're getting from the deceased, and that would mean we'd have to really be guided by them as to how do we move forward, and if that is even possible, right? And then by doing so, we're holding space for the families to re-grieve in some instances, to be re-traumatized, and a lot of the times they share with us, kind of their lineage, their family trees, and they share stories about, the individual that has passed, and all that ethnography, we capture that, right? Because that's now part of the story of this cultural resource that we're managing, right? So we capture that, we put that in a data source, and we keep it as per the regulations afford for the storage of data. And then we ensure that between, and like I said earlier, we're relationship managers. So between the mechanisms, between the developers as well, or the other stakeholders that are involved, we make sure that there's an appreciation for how traumatic this may be or can come across. And so we afford the mechanisms for counseling and therapy, whether this is in a group context or in a individual or family context. And a lot of the times it's around the undertones of poverty and pain and hurt and harm. And so we try to, highlight those for the parties that be to get assistance. And I think in the last 14 years, just to kind of round up where we're going with this, is I've had the opportunity to just do some reflections, and some of the things that I've learned from this process is that in acknowledging and recognizing and holding space for these different cultures, these different belief systems, these different funerary practices and burial practices, I've inadvertently been affected to understanding that there is a spiritual repatriation of sorts. And we do engage in this as a service offering, as an organization. But in this instance, I mean, the recognition of an afterlife, without the material cultural evidence of human remains, which sometimes it's not the case. We don't find faunal remains when we excavate to conduct a grave relocations. It does happen. And when that happens, we need to revert back to imploring our African logic systems around ritual and around a recognition of those deceased, those who have walked the path before us, and look to them to guide us. So I think I hadn't, in my younger years, I don't think I had qualified that with some kind of sentimentality. But today I realize that a symbolic representation is so powerful, and that people are able to heal using anthropogenic signatures and things that you wouldn't otherwise, look at as beacons or of healing. The soils, the trees, the flowers, the burial objects that we find, and we see the families' pain and hurt and tears while we're physically exhuming and moving their loved ones. Excuse me, and moving their loved ones. This matters, right? This helps, and it's important. This is really important, and I think the appreciation for it, I got, I think it's about 10 years ago when I was interning at a a larger heritage resource agency at the time, where I was introduced to this process, and I was afforded the opportunity to be part of a project wherein a lady was requesting that we relocate her deceased husband's grave from one side of the country to the other side of the country where they were originally from and where they were married. And after that process, I remember she called me and she said to me, "Thank you so much, not just to you, but to you and your team, because now I can die in peace." Right. And I really, uh, I really realized then that this is not important for me. This is not just a job for me. I'm not just ticking a box or compliance box. This matters. This matters for us, for people like us, people who have hurt, who've been displaced, who have been moved, who have been killed, who have been harmed. Excuse me. So going back to that family with the cultural custodian, I realized that in however way we grieve, and however way we hold on or even let go of those who matter, who loved us, we love them, right? And continuing with life after death means the memorialization of the living continues, right? So in that effect, one really is immortalized, right? You never, I think this was a Game of Thrones kind of abstract. Someone said, "What is dead may never die," and this is truly in the application of spiritual repatriations. You recognize and appreciate that that is an undeniable fact. And I think this is just the second last one of my slide, and we'll get to the questions. And I just wanted to make a note on how globally there have been calls for repatriation and restitution and reparations and legislative reform around how we humanize the dead, right? How we ensure that those who have passed may be afforded the end of a life, right? Like all living things, I think we were taught in our primary years, go through a life cycle, right? And there's also a death cycle. And at what point do these objects that and these human remains that are held in institutions and so forth come out of that and join the life cycle and the death cycle again? And I think one of the biggest considerations for this rehumanization, for collective healing, is that we need to have ethical considerations for how we are displaying, handling human remains. And even just in our cemetery designs in South Africa, for example, we have been, uh, repatriating struggle icons from the apartheid era who have gone to, or who are buried in Lusaka, in Zambia, in other Southern African countries, who are now being who are coming home, right? And if you know, it's not called a repatriation, it's called a homecoming ceremony, right? So even in itself, we note that use of language that we spoke about earlier, and how we're ethically considering the way in which we are empowering the voices of those who have passed, and to be moved out of these storehouses of colonialization, and back into a home where they are loved and they're cared for. And in our cemetery designs in the past, because of the legacy of apartheid, if you note the image just under that, it says on the left hand side you find these graves that are fenced and they've got clear markings, but on the right hand side, where there's trees and shrubs and just some stones that has looked to be scattered, those are also graves. The left are graves of white colonists who then lived on this farm and died there, and on the right hand side are the graves of the farm workers and some veterans who also were buried there unmarked. So just looking at how do we balance these scales, and how do we then redress the past through healing. So I think globally, the calls for restitution and repatriation are need to be, I think they've been slow, but I think now the uptake from different institutions and private collectors, we all need to get on this bandwagon. Okay, and that is all from me. This is Gasetswana in my language, Ke a leboga. So I just wanted to say thank you again. And you're welcome to contact us on social media, as well as on the Deathfolx platform. Thanks so much. Any questions?
Whew, that
So
was
many.
yes. That was. Go ahead and go first. I've got a whole page of notes, and I want to let everyone.
That's
who's
what I was doing too,
ask
was just writing
questions
things that I was like,
too.
oh, I want to know more about
I
this.
know, but just the way that you so elegantly held the spiritual aspect of this work, the importance and the reclamation of this work with this careful, timely academic process. It was inspiring and such an act of love. And to let the process be so important and multifaceted, and like you said, building these relationships, it's such repair work, it's such healing work, but you've merged it into such a smart methodology. So I'm just very impressed and thankful that you've come to teach it to us. And what a model for humans to follow, to make reparations with one another. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank
Um,
you so much.
I
I
don't
sincerely appreciate that.
I don't even know where to begin. I think one of the things that I was kind of surprised by was that there's, 12 languages. So there's 12 different cultures in, a pretty small area. That's not how it is up here in the States at all. And then you also said that some of these places it's taken years before they allow the grave relocation. So my question is, what are some of those more, I don't know if the right word's unique coming from us? It's like, wow, I just want to learn all of this because we don't really have rituals here for the most part. I mean, we have cake at birthdays and a Christmas
Yeah.
tree. That's really it. So I was just kind of curious of what are some of maybe those beliefs or rituals that need that much time and space, or if it's more of people can't come to an agreement, and so it's just like a standstill.
Yeah, yeah. I think thanks so much for that question, Lauren. I get that question quite a bit, and it comes from people who are not necessarily like practitioners in the discipline. Even academic professors in archaeology are like, why is it taking 10 years? Why is this taking 15 years? And I think it's because ritual in a sense me is really can be coffee and cake for someone's birthday. That if that is what you do every year on that day, it is a ritual, right? We don't There aren't scales of ritual and say, this is more significant because it's got 1,000 people and this one has 2 people. I think that's where one of the challenges is that actually having a clear understanding of which is significant in this process, right? Because there isn't really a ritual for reburial, right? We recognize death as a kind of longitudinal point, right? We can even just call it a point at the end of a life. But I think in African, especially in South African communities that have such a lot of Victorian influences now in modern burial practices, with someone sitting on a mattress when the deceased is coming from the mortuary, being brought into the house to spend their last night in the house, and when the sun rises in the morning, that body will be taken in a casket to a church, and then from the church it will be taken to a cemetery, and at the cemetery it will be laid to rest and then covered, and ashes to ashes and dust to dust, right? So that ritual is separate from the customary traditional rituals. There are rituals that lead up to that, which involve a lot of cleansing, and a lot of appeasement and a lot of recognition. And I'll speak for myself and my family. When I lost my father around 9 years ago, on the eve of my father's passing, no, on the eve of my father's burial, my mother, and I'm Setswana, right? So I'm not Pedi, I'm not Nguni speaking. I am Bantu. I'm of the Bantu peoples of Southern Africa. We've been classed that way. Well, that's another conversation. But so we in our practices there was a lot of Victorian influence. I mean, we all wear black, right, when we're going to a funeral. So those are commonalities in ritual and ceremony, rather, in the funerary practice. But in the traditional customs, there are chickens that need to be slaughtered that cannot live till the next day, that are brought in by a specific member of a family, an uncle or a direct relative. The youngest, my younger sister's hair was shaved off. So, because to understand grief, to understand loss, you must lose a part of you, and be born into a new. And that's part of a cleansing ritual, right? And then my mother as well, she also had her head shaven. And then there's one person who feeds her, one person who cooks specifically for her during the entire, year that she will be mourning, that she was mourning. And a year after that mourning period, she's able to take off those grief clothes. So she'll only have 4 sets of clothes that she will wear through that time. And those will be black, and she cannot leave her house. The sun cannot rise wherever she slept without her having slept in her marital room, but not in her marital bed, right? She will sleep on the floor, um, to honor the dead, right? And if those kind of rituals are very exhaustive and emotionally exhaustive, and that's why I think the deliberations between the domestic issues between families, around what rituals will we practice when we now have to rebury? Are we having another funeral? Because if we're having another funeral, this allows us an opportunity to now give the deceased a dignified burial, in that this time around, for example, in the past, if they were not buried in a casket and didn't have a headstone, this is the opportunity through the grave relocation process to now give them a dignified funeral, right? So those are the big ritualistic challenges around why that takes a lot of time. But also there are other issues around, outside of domestic issues, which are a lot to do with authorizations and permits, the administrative parts of things, that also can take quite some time. Yeah.
Ugh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. And we talk about that a lot. I mean, we have a really rough time grieving here because we don't have those rituals. And you said it's exhaustive. And I think grief is exhausting. And if you're holding it in, which is kind of the cultural practices here, because we don't have people who tend to you when you're grieving like they do in other countries. And we don't have, this understanding that you get to stay in your house for a year and be in this like deep grief and carry this. And first off, it's like always so inspiring to hear. So thank you for sharing like your personal stories and what your family did. But it's just one of those things where you realize how important it is to grieve the person and to honor them and to honor their love and their life that they had. Um, and I just hope everyone who's watching this recording can also try to just take these little parts and like to even think about being able to kind of redo a funeral that took place before you were even born, right? And to be able to honor your great great grandmother. Like, what a beautiful gift that you are giving people in such a way that is never practiced here, ever. I mean, we have archaeologists who will take the bones, and right now in America, we're trying to return all the Native American bones that we have taken over all this time and return them to the people for proper burials, because a lot of them are in museums still here.
Yeah.
And I think about that for them, the healing that can take place to be able to give that ritual and that ceremony and that love the way that they always deserve to be, that was taken away. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you so much,
And not
Lauren.
just for the people. Lauren spoke to the healing of, the family members and the healing of the living, but I think just as much the healing of the dead. right? To finally receive the justice, the recognition, the love, the works, the action. I think that that lets you rest at peace. So good work you are doing.
Thank you so much, Erin. I sincerely appreciate it, and thanks again for the opportunity, and thank you for holding space for me. And it's not often that I work in such a dark discipline, especially as a woman. We're kind of placed on the tail end of things. So I sincerely appreciate just the platform to not only speak about what my personal journey, but also to speak about the significance of what you do as well. I think holding space for each other as women and as just people in the death sector is extremely vital. And in South Africa, we're still learning to talk about this out loud in public. So this is extremely significant work you're doing. So thank you so very much. And as they say in Setswana, let's amaeng ka kgotso. Please be at peace.
Thank you so much. I would love to be in touch with you and follow your work more and also be someone who can hold space because I know Lauren and I can understand what you shared. It can be misunderstood as something dark when it is really something so loving. All right.
Thank you, Annlin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll be here again next month. But again, I just really appreciate everything that you're doing, everything that you've shared with us. It's really inspiring. So thank you.
All right. Till
Thanks
next
so much. And I noted there's a few questions in the chat, and anything that we didn't get through, please do send those through to me, and I'll see if I'll be able to respond to them either on the platform or directly. But I sincerely appreciate the questions and all the queries. Please do keep in touch. I am available for that.
Thank you. Please add, we'll include how to get a hold of you where this is posted, but feel free to add that in the chat too. And most of what's in the chat questions is just gratitude for everything you've taught here today.
Yes. Yes. All right.
Hello.
Thank you. We'll see you all next month. And again, thank you, Annlin.